A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I felt
I
from
feel
this.
right.
But I was so
And I just thought, well,
I had figured it out
it was that golden moment.
because science was on my side.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Story Collider, where true personal stories about science help us to discover how weird and wonderful it is to exist in this world and be a human. I'm your host, Misha Gajewski, and today's episode, in honor of Disability Pride Month, we're sharing two incredible stories from scientists with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired by tales of courage, empowerment, and the unyielding spirit. As you may know, people with disabilities are underrepresented in STEM fields, and all too often they face isolation and ableism in academia. This experience is all too familiar for our first storyteller, Alma Schrage. Alma is a bee biologist currently involved in conservation research for the endangered rusty-patched bumblebee. She's also been deaf since birth. Her story was recorded in her home in Jamestown, North Dakota, and is all about trying to find her place in science. It's such a beautiful story that always leaves me in awe of how creative people with disabilities have to be just to do what able-bodied people take for granted. And I'm so excited I get to share it with you. Here's Alma.
When I attend my first ornithology conference in undergrad, I'm excited. I want to be able to do something meaningful, something I enjoy, obviously, but also contribute to the broader ecosystem and human flourishing, something that I can be proud of doing and is interesting to me on an aesthetic level. My love for science is very much a love for beauty, the pattern of how organisms interact to make complex ecosystems. But as a deaf student in a mainstream hearing university, I feel I have so much to prove, that I'm smart, that I'm not a safety liability in the field, or a burden to the people I work with. With all of that weighing down, I'm too scared to ask for accommodations for my first conference as an undergraduate. So for every presentation, I'm sitting in the front row, and as the day inches on, the back of my neck winds tighter and tighter, and I lean forward slightly, eyes glued on the speaker. Speech reading isn't magic. In a quiet room, I can recognize maybe 4 to 12% of the words with my hearing aid. Another 30 to 40% I can perhaps lip read, and the majority I guess based on context and my knowledge of the topic and the speaker. After a couple of hours of playing this high-speed crossword, my eyes and brain start to fry. Add additional speakers, background noise, bad lighting, and I understand nothing. By the end of each day, I'm so physically and mentally exhausted from trying to follow the conversation that I hide in a bathroom and cry. After the conference ends, I can't read or look at a screen because of the throbbing eye strain from lip reading for 8 hours a day for 3 days. I'm so drained that I have no question, no thought, no wonder. No questions about other people's research or ideas about birdsong that I study, or the satisfaction of seeing data come together to tell a story. The joy I feel doing research is gone. All I feel is a gray exhaustion that covers everything. For my last conference as an undergraduate, this time I muster the courage to ask my research advisor for accommodation, the same ones I get for school, cart captioning. Despite the fact that it's illegal for conferences not to provide these accommodations in the U.S., the conference doesn't plan for accommodation and instead tells her it's too expensive. When she relays this to me, I smile and I say I'll manage because I'm afraid to cause trouble. But at the same time, it's a door shutting in my face. I'm not wanted here. I give my presentation and then attend only one session in the whole conference. I know by now I won't get any useful information from staying, so I spend most of the conference outside, hiking on my own. But during a networking event, my research advisor introduces me to an older researcher to talk one-on-one. He asks me what my plans are after graduating, and I reply honestly, I want to get field research experience, but since I don't have any. He laughs and tells me that fieldwork is not a career. I smile and I don't say anything. He wanders off to talk to someone else. How do I explain to him that I don't see a career here? I walk through the room, watching but with no way to understand, and enter the noisy conversation. No one approaches me, and it's impossible for me to break into a conversation that's flowing at full speed between people I don't know. So much of my lip reading ability is reliant on contextual information about the conversation topic and the person speaking. So with strangers, there needs to be a reciprocal awareness, an effort to communicate, a desire to connect, which I don't see. Watching these conversations from the outside, I realize I would be miserable in academia. I have to find some other way into biology, into research. It's 8 months later. I've graduated college and have landed my first field job in biology. A short gig that runs for only 3 months in the Sierra Nevada mountain, collecting data on post-fire habitat use by songbirds and bumblebees. It's also 3 a.m. in the morning. I climb into the driver's seat and we're off into the dark on a road that climbs up into the mountain. The crew lead and I have already checked and double-checked that we have everything. GPS, radio, batteries, and all the gear for the bee surveys we must do after the morning bird work is done. I pack one more item, a pocket-sized WAV format recorder with omnidirectional microphone. Around 4:30 a.m., we turn off the dirt road onto a rougher one. I'm weaving the truck between the foot-deep ruts and boulders as they loom up in the dark, at the same time trying not to slow down too much since we need to reach our first survey point before sunrise. It's close to 5 a.m. when I pull over and park. The crew lead and I hurry through the dense chaparral to hit the first point count location, where the first survey of the day must happen half an hour before the sun rises. We get to the point as the sky starts to lighten. We pause, catch our breath, and let the birds forget the sound of our passage. I step over a few fallen logs and wedge my recorder into an upright snag, microphones angled up and outward to catch the sounds of the birds singing in the trees. I hit record and then step back to where the crew lead is and take out my clipboard with data form. I begin the vegetation assessment, filling out the form on my clipboard as I look around and check distances through my rangefinder. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see the crew lead noting down bird species on his clipboard as he identifies the individual birds calling and singing. A minute later, I finish the vegetation survey. I pull out my smartphone and I am listening too, not by sound but by sight, through the oscillating lines of a spectrogram running on my phone screen. This maps the arc and trill of birdsong in a language that I can read. I note the sloping vertical bars of the orange-crowned warbler, the slower, more level vertical bar of a Wilson's warbler, and bold, low brushstrokes of a black-headed grosbeak singing. I see other song, the buzzy chicken scratch notes of a Cassin's fin, and a treat, a canyon wren, a long sequence of crisp tilde signs that signify clear whistling notes. I see another that I don't recognize. I snap a screenshot for reference. A minute later, I see 2 brief notes that look strangely precise, inorganic, and I know the time's up. That's the beeps of the crew lead stopwatch. I hop over the logs and grab my recorder, hit the stop button. I tuck it into my pocket as I step back and quietly list off the species that I recognize. The crew lead nods and adds a couple that I didn't identify. I think back to the song I didn't recognize and translate the visual characteristics that I saw, describing it with sound adjectives that I know hearing people recognize, such as clear, buzzy, single note, multiple note, rising trill. He nods in recognition, assigning it to one of the species that I missed. The other might have been too far for my phone to pick up. Maybe I'll have a chance to see it at the next survey point. Through the morning, we slowly work our way up the drainage. At each survey point, I repeat the same process. Complete the vegetation survey, listen, then quietly confer. In this way, I learn the songs of different species and get better with practice. It is not perfect. My phone does not have the same level of sensitivity as some human ears do, and I cannot pick out the song the crew lead hears beyond 80 meters. Much later, when I describe these failings to another biologist who does point counts occasionally, she stops and reminds me that even the most hearing people are not very good at point counting, and she tells me to be less self-critical. It still feels like failing, though. Most people react to my bird listening practice like a one-hit wonder. They marvel, but they treat it as an absolute quantity. If I get an identification wrong, I get a pitying look, and if I get it right, It's because I'm exceptional. There's no room for me to make mistakes, to learn. It's rare for other birders to concretely engage with what I am doing. But the crew lead does. He doesn't spend any time marveling at what I am doing, or the strangeness. He installs the same spectrogram app on his phone, and we argue and compare notes. And every time it's my turn to get up before dawn to help with the point count, I learn more song. And that's just the first 6 hours of my day, before I move on to bumblebee surveys. A blessing of bee surveys is that bumblebees generally do not give a damn if you are bumbling around, making noise, so long as you're not in their immediate vicinity. The Sierra Nevadas are bear country, and field biologists learn one cardinal rule: make noise. It warns the bears of your presence and gives them time to move away. Prey animals are not noisy. They move quietly to escape detection. Bears and other strong or dangerous animals do the opposite. They make noise. So the way you move through the world conveys what you are. Be quiet and move cautiously, and you are prey. Be loud, and you are an animal that does not need to hide to survive. Growing up in a hearing world, you have to learn to be constantly aware of your voice without necessarily hearing it. I always had to think about the noises I made to contain my voice with just the right amount of volume, tone, enunciation. To sound deaf, regardless of intelligibility, was again and again driven home as something to hide. The message was be smaller, be quieter, be palatable to other people. Don't scare them with your strangeness. So I love being in bear country, where it's safer to be loud. I stop thinking and I become myself, noisy, free. When I move, the world talks back. Logs creak, twigs snap, leaves crackle. The white thorn rustles and scrapes as I push through it. Some of the lawn thorns poke through my shirt and pants and break my skin, but it doesn't bother me. I move through the world like a bear. My hearing coworkers have a harder time of it. Because they hear, they walk quietly without thinking. And all of them have a moment during the summer when a bear comes a little too close, seems a little too interested, and they have to wave and shout and nervously wait for the bear to leave. And I learn that outside is the place that I can always return to. On the human front, I'm rooting for the underdogs in science. They are often the people who see me and reciprocate, whose desire to connect and belong is as strong as my own. And all summer long, I crash across the mountainsides. The bears leave me alone, and the bees don't give a damn.
That was Alma. To learn more about her, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Being a storyteller on stage is just one way to make Storyclatter happen, but if standing alone in the spotlight in front of an audience doesn't speak to you, maybe becoming a Storyclatter donor might be more your speed. Storyclatter donors play a vital role in our ability to bring you this podcast. We're in this together. Storyclatter is one big experiment that's designed to connect us around our love of discovery, curiosity, and the natural world. If you believe in the power these stories have and this mission, please donate to the Storyclatter at storyclatter.org/donate. The most popular level is $10 a month, and you can make your tax-deductible donation at storyclatter.org/donate. But really, any level makes a difference, and we're so grateful to everyone who supports Storyclatter. What's the best way to learn a new language? Immersion. But sometimes that's not in the cards. But you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Now, I might only be 1 week into learning German with Babbel, but I'm so excited to start being able to speak German with my mom. With Babbel, you can learn everything you need to have real-world conversations, and all it takes is just 10 minutes a day. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college, which is bonkers. But Babbel is conversation-based learning with science-backed cognitive tools like spaced repetition and interactive lessons created by real language teachers and voiced by real native speakers. So here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/story. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/story. Spelled BABBEL.com/story. Rules and restrictions may apply. Our next story is from storyteller Jennifer Piatek. Jennifer is a planetary scientist who studies impact craters on Mars. a college professor teaching geology and astronomy courses, and in general, someone who's just trying to navigate the world from a wheelchair. Her story was recorded in her home in New Britain, Connecticut, and is such a powerful and inspiring story of resilience and perseverance, all for the love of science. I'm so inspired by Jennifer, and I know you will be too. You're gonna love this story. Here's Jennifer.
I fell in love with planetary geology a little bit late. To be honest, I was the horse crazy girl who wanted to be a veterinarian until the day my high school physics teacher talked about sending humans to Mars. And suddenly I was hooked. My college astronomy courses skipped the solar system, so instead I found a summer job working with a geology professor who studied asteroids. It wasn't quite Mars, but I happily spent late nights graphing telescope data, fascinated by the idea that we could figure out what distant asteroids were made of using only light. And I found out who I really wanted to be. So I dreamed about being an interplanetary astronaut. And until I could go on those trips myself, I wanted to be the person who used light to unravel the mysteries of Mars. I found a part of my identity. So that identity meant packing up and leaving the small New England town where I grew up for graduate school, west across the United States, and then back east again. But I had a goal. And if that meant hiking up a cinder cone or stumbling across a rocky lava flow, no matter how difficult, I would do it because that's what I thought a real geologist would do. And still, I felt I wasn't a real scientist yet. I mean, I was still a student or a postdoc that reported to an advisor. But perhaps maybe as a professor, I would feel that I was more of a success. So with a little bit of luck, I found a position for a planetary scientist at a small university that is less than an hour's drive from where I grew up. Small university means more teaching, so I had to be a little creative and work to fit in the science around my class prep and grading. I like teaching though, so it seemed like a good compromise. Although I'm the only planetary scientist in my institution, so I had to make a little extra time to travel to a couple scientific conferences each year so I could network with other planetary scientists with similar interests and talk about our current research. I found small grants so that I could join these colleagues on field trips and explore the desert in Chile or the mountains of Montana or Utah and compare them to the landscapes we find on Mars. I was planning to someday, though, have my own field project that I could talk about at those science conferences. Then I thought, then I would really be able to say I was a planetary geologist. So at the end of my third year as an assistant professor, I went to an early career workshop, which is the kind of thing where pre-tenure scientists like me sit around listening to presentations by more senior academics, and we ponder in discussions and gallery walks about how we could be successful and happy in our academic careers. And one of the staples of these workshops is the discussion of a healthy work-life balance and the importance of taking time for yourself. So as I land back at my home airport from the workshop, the weather forecast says sunny with a few clouds, and it seems only appropriate that instead of driving home from the airport to deal with the mail and the laundry, I would take some time for myself. It was a lovely June afternoon, so I thought I should spend the afternoon riding my horse Jack. And Jack's a dark brown color that seems almost black, so he's in essence the black stallion of my childhood daydreams. And he responds to my greetings of, "Hey, a handsome," with a nuzzle, and he lets me lean into his shoulder and give him a big hug. Although sometimes I think that has to do more with the handful of mints in my pocket. So our day starts out like so many other afternoons at the barn. We go through our grooming routine with lots of mints and pets and hugs, and then we go down to the arena. After I get on and we walk around a bit and get kind of settled with each other, we go off and trot and canter around as a warm-up. And I'm just enjoying the afternoon. There's just enough of a cool breeze that it isn't too hot. And after trotting and cantering for a bit, I think, okay, it's time for a walk break. But before we do that, I thought it might be fun to hop over this enticing new little white gate fence that's in the middle of the arena. So we trot up to it and get over in a bound. But after we land, there's something happens. There's a stumble or a buck, and I go over Jack's shoulder and land on my back in the sand, hard. And I've fallen like this before, so as I'm falling, I expect the impact should hurt, but it doesn't this time. I'm only numb after I land. I realize I can no longer feel or move my legs at this point. After a few minutes, it starts to feel again, and it feels like I'm lying on a rock that's poking between my shoulder blades. Think about the opportunities to expand the broader impact statement on your next grant is not exactly the kind of thought I expect to be racing through my mind as I'm lying in the sand, unable to feel my legs, waiting long minutes for EMTs to arrive. While I'm lying in the sand, my thoughts aren't about the lack of feeling in my legs, but more about how am I going to continue to do my science? How am I going to teach? How can I do field work if I can't walk? And it was that moment where my science brain takes over. And it realizes that the thinking about the negatives, fear and anxiety and the realization of suddenly being disabled, that this would be a downward spiral into the abyss. Instead, my science brain focuses on the scientist identity that was so important and starts thinking logically about how I can retain that identity on what might now be a new challenging path. So it turns out the important thing for me was my identity as a scientist. All the EMTs, nurses, and doctors who took care of me were told that I taught geology and astronomy when they asked my name and what I did. No doubt part of the protocol for assessing head injuries. And since I always rode with a helmet, fortunately, I did not have. I gave a book recommendation about local geology to the doctor that showed me the MRI that confirmed my injury. There was never an aha moment where I realized what this meant, but always the sense that in order to continue being me, I needed my science. So I found out in the hospital the next morning that the force of the impact had caused a burst fracture of my vertebrae and severed my spinal cord completely. And I should have been devastated, but I knew at that moment that despair would be a hard path to return from. So instead, during the weeks spent in a rehab hospital, I focused on what I could do. A goals list affixed to the bulletin board in my room centered on keeping the identity I had crafted. Going back to teaching was at the top of that list. Figuring out how to navigate travel to conferences, planning activities with friends underneath, and a comic celebrating the Spirit Mars rover decorated the bottom. I was fortunate in many ways that I chose the path I did. The bulk of my research is working with computers and satellite images, not out in the field. And although grad school and a postdoc had taken me across the country and back again, my current university where I work is less than an hour drive from where I grew up and where most of my family lives. The rehab hospital where I spent the rest of the summer after my accident is essentially just up the road from campus. That doesn't mean, though, that somehow life would be the same or that I would be the same person I was before my accident, just now a person in a wheelchair. There were a lot of new barriers to me now in a wheelchair that I had never considered. Just a simple one, the restroom labeled handicapped in my building has a door that's much too heavy for me to open and my wheelchair doesn't fit anyway. I expected that I would have trouble writing on the whiteboard in a classroom from a wheelchair. So I thought, I'll just use more computer projected slides. It didn't occur to me that I might have to log in to a computer that has a keyboard that's over my head because the lectern is set up for a person who's 5 to 6 feet tall, not someone who can duck under the 3-foot barrier in the parking garage. Many of our labs have tall benches that are difficult or impossible to reach from a seated position or are so close together there's barely enough room to pass a wheelchair. I've always been someone who prefers hard over easy, so at first these challenges feel like opportunities. I can grab little victories by figuring out the best way to overcome these challenges and feel like I'm mocking the universe that put those barriers in my way. Eventually, though, the challenges become tiring rather than invigorating. I love being the only planetary scientist in my university, the only fish in a small pond, if you will. But I feel like I give up my independence every time I ask for help. And I remember being taught in our geology courses not to rely on someone else for help identifying rocks or locating yourself on a map. So I always felt the expectation that I needed to be able to do it myself. Hike up a volcano, deliver a lecture on the rocks, jet off to multiple scientific conferences, plan future projects with colleagues. And suddenly, I'm no longer planning my dream research trips to remote field locations to compare to Mars. Now I have to ask for help just to set up and break down my labs or to carefully plan trips so that I know exactly where I will stay and if there's a way for me to get around. Sometimes I worry that I'm no longer seen as a real geologist because my work is more focused on computer analysis of satellite images now, rather than hiking out to distant outcrops and banging on rocks and taking compass measurements, as if I could do that on Mars anyway. So I hate to ask for help, but it's more important that I make sure, say, that we do the impact crater lab in my astronomy class. So I get over it. I get over the discomfort of asking students to take the sand trays and set them up because I love to see them make impact craters using slingshots. I loathe the hassle of traveling, particularly the part where I have to be carted on and off an airplane in an aisle chair. But I don't want to miss out on the excitement of a scientific conference or the chance to explore a new field site. It just takes more planning now. So my teaching is more intentional. I think more about what I write on the board since I can't write as much. I'm more picky about the conferences that I attend because they need to be in accessible locations. And I always try to get out into the field, not just to prove to everyone else that I can still do the things that a real geologist does, but so I can prove it to myself too. And I found a community of people with similar experiences that I can rely on just to listen or to give me a push when the path gets just a little bit too steep. So there are things we each can't do and things we can, but maybe they don't define us. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I can't navigate stairs, at least safely. I cannot fit my wheelchair through a narrow door, and I cannot board a plane without assistance from the ground crew. But I can still stare at spacecraft images of Mars in awe. I can write code to help interpret those images, share my passion for planetary geology with my students, cheer for my favorite hockey team, sing along with the angry music on my Get to Work playlist, as long as no one else is listening. In the end, the important thing for me is that I still am, and I will continue to be a planetary scientist.
That was Jennifer. If you'd like to learn more about her, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Our website is just one way to connect with Storyclatter, but there are so many other ways, and we hope you'll use them all. You can always follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Head to storyclatter.org to become a financial supporter, or if you want to come to one of our shows, start your own Storyclatter show in your community, or even learn how to tell your own science story, you can learn all about that on our website too. This podcast is produced by me, Misha Gajewski, along with Nikisha Roberts-Washington, Jen Chen, and Aaron Barker, Executive Director and co-founder of The Storyclatter. The stories featured in today's episode were adapted from the book Uncharted: How Scientists Navigate Their Own Health, Research, and Experiences of Bias, which was edited by Skylar Bayer and Gabby Serrato-Marx, and were produced for this podcast by me. Special thanks goes out to the Storyclatter's board and staff, including Anne-Marie Lonsdale, Leslie Burnson, and Lindsay Cooper. Our theme music is by Ghost, and next week I'll be back with stories about getting into shape and losing weight. But don't worry, we haven't turned into one of those podcasts. We promise there will be no peddling of supplements or diet pills. Just great, old-fashioned personal stories about two very different journeys to a healthier life. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.